Attar is my guide, Attar is my guide. By the grace of Allah, Attar is my guide. My murshid has changed millions of lives. The prophetic sunnah, he is revived. The leader of the Sunnis, he is our pride. By the grace of Allah, Attar is my guide.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen. Amma ba'd. Fa'a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. As-salatu wassalamu alayka ya Rasulallah. Wa ala alika wa ashabika ya Habiballah. As-salatu wassalamu alayka ya Nabiyallah. Wa ala alika wa ashabika ya Noorallah. Dear Islamic brothers, dear viewers and listeners of Madani channel, welcome back to this episode of the silsila Discourses of Attar. Remember, at the beginning of the silsila, try to make as many good intentions as possible to gain maximum thawab. For example, I will listen to the silsila for the pleasure of Almighty Allah Azza wa Jal. I will note down the important points. I will try to practice upon them, encourage them amongst my family members, my spouse, my children, and my society. In this manner, whatever good intentions you can make them now. Inshallah ta'ala, we will gain maximum amount of thawab and rewards. There are countless benefits and blessings for that person who recites durood and salawat upon Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wasallam. In a very beautiful hadith, our Aqa, our master Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wasallam has mentioned, the summary of which is that person who recites durood, salawat or salutations upon me 200 times on a Friday, then 200 years worth of his sins will be forgiven. Subhanallah. Sallu ala al-Habib, sallallahu ta'ala ala Muhammad, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Salatan wa salaman alayka ya Rasulullah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Dear Islamic brothers, dear viewers and listeners of Madani channel, we all desire forgiveness. This is one beautiful way, a beautiful method to attain forgiveness from Allah Azza wa Jal, to continue in reciting abundant durood. And even when we recite durood sharif, salawat or dhikrullah, if possible, make the intention of sending us Isal Thawab, conveying this reward to the deceased, family members or friends or relatives, in fact to the entire ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In this regard, we must be aware that one can cause some kind of difficulty for deceased members of our family, or any Muslim in fact, when we are visiting the graveyard. Listen carefully. Remember, to cut the dry grass from a graveyard and to take it is permissible, but it is not permissible, according to the Sharia, the Islamic sacred law, to allow animals to walk or to graze on the graves. Al-Hazrat, the Imam of the Ahl Sunnah, Imam Ahmad Raza Khan, Rahmatullah Ta'ala Ali, has stated that this faqir, humbly referring to himself, has heard from his fellow disciple Sayyidi Shaykh Abul Hasan Nuri, Rahmatullah Ta'ala Ali, that there was a place called Ganje Shahidan, the land over a collective grave in which many martyrs, many shuhada, they were buried therein. In a jungle, this was situated near a jungle by Marehra Sharif in Hind, where a man, he would take his buffalo to graze. One day, there was some soft area in this place, and suddenly the hoof of this buffalo got wedged and stuck in the ground. And it was discovered that there was actually a grave there. A sound then came from the grave that, "Oh man, you have caused me trouble, as the foot of your buffalo has stepped on my chest." Dear Islamic brothers, dear viewers and listeners of Madani channel, from this we learn that the martyrs are alive and their bodies remain intact in the grave. Umarah bin Hazm, Rahmatullah Ta'ala Ali, has stated the blessed and beloved Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wasallam saw me sitting on a grave and said, O one on the grave, come down from the grave. Neither trouble the buried one, nor get troubled by him. From this Madani narration, those who go with the funeral processions to the graveyard and sit on the graves carelessly during the burial should take heed. Hazrat Sayyidina Qasim bin Mukhimar rahmatullah ta'ala alayhi has stated, a man once put his foot on a grave upon which a voice came from within this grave saying, Ilayka anni wala tu'dhini, means move away and do not trouble me. Sayyidina Abu Qilaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhu has stated, I would travel from Syria to Basra, Iraq, and one day I went down into a trench. I performed wudu and performed 2 rak'at of nafil optional salah. Then I rested my head against a grave and slept away. When I had awakened, I suddenly heard the one buried in that grave complaining and saying, لَقَدْ آذَيْتَنِي مُنْذُ اللَّيْلَةِ, that is, you have troubled me the entire night. We know and you do not know, but we have no power over deeds. The 2 rak'at of nafil salah that you offered is better than the world and everything in it, the deceased person is saying. Then he further stated, may Allah Azza wa Jal reward the living of the world on our behalf, because when they send thawab and reward to us, it enters upon us in the form of mountains of light. Subhanallah. Sayyidina Ibn Mina Tabi'i rahmatullah ta'ala alayhi has narrated, once I went to the graveyard, I performed 2 rakat and then I lied on top of a grave. I lied on top of a grave. I swear by Almighty Allah Azza wa Jal, I was fully awake when I heard the buried one saying, قُمْ فَقَدْ آذَيْتَنِي, meaning, stand up, get up, you have troubled me. Dear Islamic brothers, dear viewers and listeners of Madani channel, from these 2 or 3 narrations, we have learned that stepping or even sleeping on the grave will trouble the one who is deceased in it. It is absolutely prohibited. It is haram in fact, and an act leading towards Jahannam, the hellfire, to trouble any Muslim without any legitimate Shari'i Islamic reason. Therefore, do not step on any grave of a Muslim, do not trample on it, do not sit on it, and do not lean on it, because this has been prohibited by Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wasallam. Here are 2 beautiful sayings from the Prophet of Mercy, the intercessor of the Ummah, the owner of Jannah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, who has stated, I prefer to walk on embers of fire or on the edge of a sword, or my feet to be sewed to my sandals, than to walk on the grave of any Muslim. And he further states, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wasallam, it is better for a person to sit on embers of fire to the extent that it burns his clothes reaching his skin, than to sit onto a grave. Dear Islamic brothers, dear viewers and listeners of Madani channel, use the common pathway that is in the graveyard and do not walk on the newly created pathways. It is mentioned in Raddul Muhtar that it is haram, absolutely forbidden and prohibited to walk on the newly created pathways that is made by demolishing other graves. In fact, even when there is doubt regarding that new path, it is impermissible and a sin to walk on that pathway. There is a question regarding placing sweets in the graveyard for the ants to eat. That what is the ruling on taking sweets or sugar into the graveyard with the dead body to feed the ants? The answer, in the same way that the respected scholars have prohibited the taking of bread into the graveyard, the same applies for sweets. To put down flour, sweets or sugar with the intention that because of this the ants will not harm the deceased is utter ignorance. Even without this intention, it is better to distribute it amongst the pious poor people rather than giving it to the ants and the insects. Further, give charity as much as you wish at your home. It has been observed many times that during distribution of charity at the graveyard, children and others make noises and trample over the graves of the Muslims. Another question: what is the ruling from the respected scholars of Islam? What do they mention regarding the situation in which an old grave opens up, its soil comes apart, and the bones of the deceased person who was in there becomes visible? In this situation, is it allowed or not to seal the grave with soil? And the answer, in this situation, not only is it permissible to seal the grave with soil, but compulsory, wajib, as it is necessary to cover up a Muslim. In this manner, dear Islamic brothers, dear viewers and listeners of Madani channel, we must take utmost precaution when we are visiting the Qabristan, when we are visiting the graveyard. Indeed, there are horrific consequences of opening a grave without any Shari'i requirement. In this regard, it is mentioned in page 502 of Malfuzat Ala Hazrat. Once Allama Tash Kubra Zada Rahmatullah Ta'ala Ali read a hadith that stated, the soil of the grave does not eat the bodies of the scholars. Satan, the humiliated devil, whispered into his heart, my teacher was a very great scholar. Open his grave and take a look to see what state he is in. That whisper took over him in such a way that one night he went towards the graveyard and opened the grave. He saw that even the shroud had not been affected. Thereafter, what he had seen, a sound came from the grave, you have seen, may Allah Azza wa Jal make you blind. At that very moment, both his eyes became blind. Similarly, another account of the painful result of an individual who unlawfully opened a grave. Al-Hazrat Imam Ahmad Raza Khan Rahmatullahi Ta'ala Ali has mentioned once a woman died and was buried. Her husband loved her a lot, and that love forced him to consider opening her grave to see what condition she was in. He expressed this intention to a scholar of Islam who forbade him from doing so. However, he did not pay any heed, he did not pay any attention, and took him to the graveyard. The scholar tried his best to persuade him, to forbid him, but he went on with his plan to open that grave whilst the scholar remained sitting by the edge of the grave. That man went down into the grave and saw that both her feet were tied to her ponytail. He put his full effort to untie it, but was unable to do so. After all, who can undo the knot tied by Allah Azza wa Jal? That scholar forbade him again, but he did not listen, he did not accept. He applied his full strength for a second time. Again the scholar forbade him, explaining that the best thing to do would be to leave her in that condition. He said, let me apply my strength one more time. After that, thereafter we will see what happens. He was just applying his strength when eventually the ground rifted and that living man and dead woman both went into the ground. They were swallowed up. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ تَعَالَى. صَلُّوا عَلَى الْحَبِيبِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ تَعَالَى عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ صَلَّى اللَّهُ تَعَالَى عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ وَسَلَّمَ. When people die whilst away from their hometown, sometimes they are then buried temporarily. Then when there is an appropriate opportunity, they are taken out and transferred to their hometown to be buried there. This is not allowed. This is impermissible actually. In an answer to a question relating to this, Al-Hazrat Imam Ahmad Raza Khan Rahmatullah Ta'ala Ali has stated that this is haram, absolutely forbidden and prohibited. It is not permissible to open the grave after burial. If anybody buries a person in a plot of land or in a field without the consent or permission of the owner, then the owner has the authority and choice to have this body taken out, disinterred, to level the ground, to build on that land, to farm on this land, and to do as he wishes. In this regard, the respected scholars of fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, have stated the deceased should not be disinterred, that is removed after burial, except for fulfilling the right of somebody. For example, if it was on the land that had been seized, the owner will have the authority to remove this body or to level the grave to the ground. In reply to a question regarding this, Al-Hazrat Imam Ahmad Raza Khan Rahmatullah Ta'ala Ali has stated that calling the landowner towards righteousness, that this is the truthful ruling of the scholars of fiqh, the scholars of jurisprudence. That is, there is permission in the Sharia for doing so. However, a Muslim should be gentle at heart and merciful towards other Muslims, especially the deceased Muslims. Almighty Allah Azza wa Jal has stated in Surah Fath, verse 29, Ruhama ubaynahum, and tender amongst themselves. If you will pardon this and allow the unlawfully buried dead person to remain buried in his land, then Allah Azza wa Jal will also pardon his sins, the landowner. As is mentioned in Surah Nur, verse 22, أَلَا تُحِبُّونَ أَن يَغْفِرَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. Do you not love that Allah should forgive you? If he does a favor to his deceased brother, then Allah Azza wa Jal will bestow his favors upon him as well. Remember, كَمَا تَدِينُ تُدَانُ. As you will do, the same will be done to you. Dear Islamic brothers, dear viewers and listeners of Madani channel, in this way as well, we should cover up the faults of our fellow Muslims and not reveal them to everybody unless it is the demand of the Sharia. We should look after one another. We should try to encourage goodness amongst ourselves and forbid evil actions. In this way, inshallah ta'ala, our society will become a beautiful garden of Medina Sharif. We will try our best, this intention we should make, to practice upon the Sunnah, to practice upon the teachings of the glorious Quran and what is contained in the blessed Hadith. May Allah Azza wa Jal, the most merciful, forgive all our sins for the sadaqah and the medium of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, all Sahaba Kiram and awliya Allah rahimahumullah ta'ala. May Allah Azza wa Jal grant us the ability to understand His beautiful deen. May Allah Azza wa Jal grant us the enthusiasm to inculcate the blessed sunnah lifestyle in our lives, to practically live the perfect sunnah lifestyle of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, and grant us good intentions, a good shaheed maut, a good maut with iman in the beautiful city of Madinatul Munawwara, in the shadow of the grand green dome, and burial in Jannatul Baqi, and the neighborhood of Rasulullah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wa sallam in Jannatul Firdaus. Ameen bijahin Nabiyyil Ameen sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Sallu ala al-Habib sallallahu ta'ala ala Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
Attar is my guide, Attar is my guide. By the grace of Allah, Attar is my guide. My Murshid has changed millions of lives. The prophetic Sunnah, he is revived. The leader of the Sunnis, he is our pride. By the grace of Allah, Attar is my guide.